Welcome to the meta episode, well, not really episode, end of season 23. This is the second time we're doing the show, so things are still a little bit informal, you could say. But for next season, I'll make a few more adjustments. Anyway, what is the show all about? So essentially, we look at the meta of GAC, where it's going, where it's been, how it's developing, both from a playstyle perspective, a team's perspective, and where I think interesting things are happening in the meta. Who am I? Why should you listen to me? So I'm Kim, obviously, as it says in my very fancy visual aid over here on the left. 9 million plus GP. I placed regularly in the top 50 in the previous GAC formats. This GAC, or the recent format, the first 6 matches were I won because they're really just a roster mismatch. And I did 50-50 for the last, so 9-3 was my overall record. Very poor showing in general. I misplayed quite a bit in the matches that I lost. But with the holidays and traveling and stuff, I didn't have time to focus as much as I would have liked to. No excuse though. That's generally what this new meta is going to build upon long term, is to show over time which players are the most consistent. Especially, like, we'll start to see this a little bit more in season 2 and season 3, once there's more than just 6 real matches. Anyway, more importantly for the show, I watch a huge amount of GAC content. A very, very large amount, mostly for the Grand Arena Science Counters tool, but also because it's a way that I learn. So, let's start digging into it. So where is the meta right now? At the end, in the mid-season, it was a total mess. There's no real way to see what was happening, from a numerical perspective at least, given that all of the matches were, not all, but the vast majority of the matches were generally very just RNG. Based on your GP, you get a skill rating, and then you're matching with other people who had that skill rating. The skill rating there's a very limited amount of skill rating in your league and division, so it was hard to see what actually was happening. The last half of the season, much more interesting. Things built a little bit more. There's a lot of changes from mid-season 23 to end of season 23. And we'll look at some of those as we go forward here. I think one of the most valuable things is the amount of sharing and new teams that were discovered and talked about within the community. That's awesome. Mostly by content creators, but also on various discourse and stuff. So we're going to look at 2 different aspects of the meta here. One is playstyles, basically how do people play GAC, or what is their approach to it. This is usually defined by a combination of how much time you have and how much you care about it. And that's different for everybody. I'm not going to talk a lot about these playstyles. You can go look at the first season 23 mid-season if you want to understand a bit more about them. But you can read this, pause and read if you'd like. Essentially, it's broken up by how much time you have, more or less, and how, it's like I said, how seriously you take it. But I'll refer to these throughout the rest of the discussion to mention a couple of times how I think they're changing or being adjusted. So, playstyles and changes happening to playstyles. This is actually really interesting, and a couple of these I didn't really expect. So, one of the significant things here is the options available for defense and offense. Because of the wider array of teams that are generally available, mostly due to the new marquees, the 4 new characters that are introduced, all of them change dramatically teams in some way, even at 3 stars and gear 10, or gear 9, gear 11, depending on what your roster level is. Because of that, the amount of teams that are very strong on defense, and by very strong I mean they do a combination of strip banners and or require a very specific set of counters, one or two, or maybe if there's only two teams that counter them reliably, that's a very strong defensive team. If there's more than two, still strong, but really by having a third available offensive team that you know that somebody can use against your defensive team, it dramatically changes the math. It's effectively 50% less strong if you look at it from a rock, paper, scissors or a chess perspective. Maybe not chess, but rock, paper, scissors. And at the same time, this also changes the offensive choices. So because the defensive teams are shifting a bit to be more focused, like putting more meta characters into the defensive team, it makes the teams available on offense, like the ends of this broad spectrum are narrowing. There's fewer really strong defensive teams, and there's fewer offensive teams that can kill a bunch of different teams. So the way that people adjust their characters, the middle, the B teams, as you could call them, B or A teams even, are much more flexible in a way. But the end, the very narrow little spectrum on each side, is much more focused. I'll use, for example, GLs, which we'll talk a bit about more in this series, in this episode, at the end of this season, in this show. One of the more complicated GL teams to beat, even with the GL, is Rey, Commander Ahsoka, Vader, Chewbacca, and a couple of other characters. Watt makes it a bit difficult too, but it's sort of a waste of Watt. But General Kenobi, or L3, or both of them, or JTR, or Resistance Hero Finn. I mean, there are some interesting ones you can put in, and look at GG as always for more details there. But this is an example of a very difficult team to take out. Barriss is a great option in that team. Barriss is a really valuable character these days. Zeta Barriss. So that team, for instance, you can beat it easily with Jedi Master Kenobi and Commander Ahsoka. But that's a very strong team. Like, it takes a lot of characters. There's other teams that can beat it too, but none are like hard counters, you could say. There's a lot of variables with mods and the fourth and fifth characters. So these sort of teams are very rare now. It's hard to find a team like this that requires just one or two teams to beat it on a regular basis. And at the same team, there's very few teams on offense, again, to use a GL, let's say Jedi Master Kenobi and Commander Ahsoka. Those two characters plus three other good ones can beat any team in the game. But there's not many other teams that can do the same thing. Jedi Master Luke is one of those. Not quite as reliable as Jedi Master Kenobi, but still, Jedi Master Luke with the right teams can beat any other team in the game. So I think that's an example of how the tips are getting smaller, but the center has a lot more flexibility and variety, which, let's go on to the next option here, ties into these next two options. Because of all the new characters, the new marquees, a lot of people, because they don't know what a character can do, possibly, are just throwing it on defense. Like, we'll see some numbers about it later, but good example of Darth Revan with Darth Talon. Some streamer made it popular and said they should do this, and so a lot of people put it on defense. It's a waste of the character, but most people don't understand how it works or how they could use it on offense or where to fit it in their teams, so they make choices like this. This was something that will go away over time, but the more that especially new powerful characters or flexible characters are added, people are more likely to just throw it on defense because they don't have time to figure it out. Another aspect of the different playstyles here, and I think these fit into all the different playstyles, not necessarily one or the other. So that's why I'm talking about how these four different vectors are like under development playstyle options. So this one, building entire teams versus one or two strong characters. This is it ties into the first point where, because the overall team strength is generally increasing, because the amount of teams you need in each league is not changing, but there's a lot more now, these four, and soon with the Imperial Trooper team, or character, Iden, Um, there's now another character that adds to a number of teams that effectively makes the lesser strong teams sort of drop by the wayside. So because of that, especially players who are advancing through the ranks or climbing from Erodium to Kyber, or from Kyber to 3 to 4 or 2 to 1 or something like that, they're up against players who have rosters that are generally more developed. Just a general statement, it's not necessarily true, but in most cases are more developed. So the team they had with like only a Relic, Geo Brute Alpha, and Spy, that's great for a lot of things, but if you're going up a fully Relic against a fully Relic KRU team, for instance, it's not going to cut it as often. So, or using Night Sisters, like for a long time you had Relic Daka and Relic Asajj usually. That would be great for mini GG teams, but when the whole GG team is reasonably Relic and B1 is like a Relic 5 plus, it's not really going to cut it again. So this is a shift that even in just 2 weeks, you see a lot of people doing with their rosters, is focusing not just on one or two linchpin or key characters, and realizing that you need, or the teams you can counter are much different when the whole defensive team is Relic. So focusing on building entire teams, which used to be popular in the past, but recently, in the last year, I guess, not nearly as popular, given that most people would rush for a GL, which is less and less important now. Or having a GL is very important, but maybe don't rush for the third or the fourth GL when it's more valuable to build out your Bounty Hunters team or your Troopers team, or in 3 months you could build a Starkiller team, which is crazy good and will kill other GLs for way, way cheaper than like gear and relic requirements for getting the prerequisites for a GL. And one of the most interesting things that we see a little bit of in the first season, but we'll see a lot more of in the coming seasons, is most people tend to choose a play style like, I'm going to put a strong defense, and I know my opponent won't be able to clear my strong defense unless they set a weak offense. Going up here to the playstyles, this is sort of the roster bully style playstyle. Or could be do what I do, depending on what guild you're in. So, as you're climbing through the ranks or divisions, depends on how you want to call it, you will come up against players who are static and play a roster bully playstyle, or maybe the do what I do playstyle. And you generally have to be more offensive heavy to beat those players, because they don't have a lot of time or effort to invest in GAC. They just want their crystals. They're expecting 1 or 2 losses each week, where you need 2 or 3 wins each week to keep climbing. So those players, it's more important to focus on having enough to clear them rather than play against a player of your caliber, maybe, where you're focusing just on who has the most banners. So this is something that you'll see more and more players struggle with as they climb through the ranks, when they're reaching players that their level of effort is not there, but their roster is very strong compared to yours. And for you, being a player who's wanting to climb, you'll have to change your team allocation, focus, etc., playstyle just for that particular match, and that could change match by match. So this is something that it is challenging, I think, for many people to try and figure out as they progress through the ranks, and makes for some very interesting matchups. It makes the off-meta counters a lot more valuable and important. So going down here then to the fleet meta. Let's put this playstyle thing to the side. We're now going to talk about fleet meta and then a couple of character meta options. So everybody, I don't know, many people complain about the fleet meta being very RNG focused. And I think that's mostly the executor aspect of it. That doing mirrors with an executor counter is totally RNG, which is a blatant falsehood. It's not true. You know what? Here, let's move these three things below. We'll talk about them afterwards, and talk about these first 2 points. So there's a lot of different executor lineups and counters to them. Let's talk about actually the counters first here. Changing this as we go. So look for there's videos from Bit Dynasty. Skelter just released a very nice one. Of course, I should add Zareth. Of course, he did a good one as well. A little bit older than Skeltrix. Bit Dynasty and Zareth have been doing it for a while, mostly Bit Dynasty. Oftentimes lesser star versus higher star, or how to beat less than 7-star executors. We at Grand Arena Science put out one quite a while ago too. There's a lot of videos on how to beat executors. There's very little RNG involved in beating them, unless you're talking about like the Malevolence versus Executor counter. And even that, it's like 30% RNG, but you have like 60 to 70% chance of winning, depending on relative gear levels. Like you can't take gear 12 characters in there. But really, what it all comes down to is what the Executor lineup is, and the relic levels of the Executor lineup. And this is what many people are sort of lumping all the Executor fights in together, and they're very much not. In a way, you can think of this, the current fleet meta, as like the beginning meta of character arena years ago, because there's no way to affect the stats of the ships aside from relicking your characters. Like mods don't exist effectively for fleet. So let's talk about some of the most popular ones. The most common one is Houndstooth, Razor Crest, and Xanadu Blood. This is the one that most people set and have in Fleet Arena. And this one, the easiest, most reliable counter to it is if your Executor is Relic 8, well, Piet is Relic 8, Relic 9, General Kenobi, or Negotiator, with Darth Vader and ETA2, and the other one doesn't matter as much, but there's a number of, that's effectively like a 90% counter. You can see videos of this on YouTube as well. It doesn't work if the Piet is Relic 9. Another lineup that's mostly Territory Wars and Grand Arena, that's much less common, is using Executor with IG-88, Razor Crest, and Xanadu Blood. This is effectively a 50-50 win-loss if you try and mirror it with an Executor. Whichever Executor goes first probably will get the contract and win. Not always, but like the vast majority of the time. However, this particular Executor lineup, if your relics are, I think you have to be like Relic 5 on average for Bistan to go first, and Relic 7 for Han's Millennium Falcon to go first. But this is pretty easy beat with Rebels. If you're up against a fully Relic 9, all starting whatever Executor fleet, your Rebels fleet will probably be similar. So that's sort of how it looks from an Executor standpoint. Now, talking about the overall fleet meta, like what fleets do you put on defense and what do you expect? It's better if you think of the fleet meta as banner focused. So the focus of winning a match in GAC is banners, right? So if you think of fleet meta as banner calculations instead of, well, maybe I'll win this Executor matchup and maybe my opponent won't, so then I'll win, or vice versa, that sucks. But for instance, if you know that you can keep an offensive choice to give you a 95% chance at a certain amount of banners, do that. If you had a low relic Executor up against somebody with a high relic Executor who's going to put their Executor on defense, then you have essentially two choices. You can throw in a trash fleet against the Executor and then use Malevolence to win 99% of the time, and you know it's probably going to be like 45 banners or something like that. Or you can keep your own Executor and throw in a trash fleet and beat the Executor with your Executor for whatever, some amount of banners, 52 or something. And then you have to keep in mind what their other fleet is going to be. So look at it from this perspective rather than, well, I'm going to leave it up to a 50% chance. Is my opponent going to beat my executor or am I going to beat theirs? You're effectively leaving your win up to chance rather than knowing that you're going to get a certain amount of banners. So think of fleet from a banner perspective if you want to maximize your, or if you want to minimize your stress effectively. I think too many people look at fleet as, oh, maybe I'll beat them, maybe I won't, and that might decide the match. It's not a very effective way to win. Anyway, that's my little soapbox preaching there. So it's then you think about what else are you placing with your executor on defense. If you place negotiator, that makes the banner calculation more complicated for your opponent and also for you because it depends more on the secondary fleet you have. Like, do you know that your rebels can take out an enemy negotiator fleet? Probably they can if you're equally relic and you're familiar with the counter, but then you sort of leave yourself vulnerable if they place negotiator plus Imperial TIE Bomber. However, if they do that, they don't have an Executress or Chimera Empire fleet. So that makes your other choices a bit more interesting. Anyway, think of it from a rock, paper, scissors and banner calculation, and I think the decisions on what fleet you place and keep are going to be easier. So let's go ahead and look at the team aspect of it and sort of the character meta in general. There's been quite a few changes and interesting things this season. First of all, well, let's look at just the overall participation. So we can tell, season 23, this season, there were 3 million GAC battles. And season 21, there were 2.3 million. So effectively, almost a 30% increase in GAC participation. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's 30% more people playing, but that they played more battles. So maybe somebody joined, before they only joined once just to participate. This time they joined 3 weeks instead of 1 week. Who knows? But we know there's a lot more battles, which is awesome. It makes for all the data to be a lot more interesting. Not necessarily more accurate, because you can sort of assume that the people who are contributing these other 30% of battles are the less serious players. Maybe not a correct assumption. Maybe it's offset by the serious players playing even more seriously. But I think that in general you have more people playing who are doing so that haven't in the past, so their fights are not going to be as accurate and developed. So the way I look at the meta in general is I expect all of the percentages to lower a couple of percentage points. Not 30 percentage points, certainly, but a couple of percentage points. So that's what I consider when I'm evaluating all the different team matchups. So in the past, in the last episode, I didn't look as much at the GLs. I didn't really look at them at all in general, because most of the GL counters and uses are not that complicated. But there are some things that are changing in the last, or you see more of in the last 2 weeks of the season. So one of the interesting ones that I'm a big fan of is maxing points, right? So GLs are the easiest way to maximize points. And obviously, if you can use a GL against another GL and maximize points, that's even better. So the first one here is Lord Vader. Now, a lot of people, it's very common knowledge, I would say, to use Lord Vader DACA Zombie, or excuse me, SLK DACA Zombie against Lord Vader. And it works against pretty much any of the lineups. The risk you have is more around timeout versus actually dying, although it is possible. If you look down here, there's some that are like 94%, 93%, 92%. So it is possible to lose, just not that common. Keep in mind, in this sheet here, I still have the 99th percentile cutoff, and I'm sorting by win, not by scene. And I have Supreme Leader Kylo Ren selected. But in almost all of the Lord Vader counters, DACA and Zombie are not helping. You're taking more time by the attacks. You're giving more alt charge to Lord Vader, and you're reducing the amount of swipes, I guess. So the siphon attack that Supreme Leader Kylo Ren does, which reduces the mastery on a target character. So you can actually, when Lord Vader does his ult, he can gain a negative mastery count from usually his tanks. They're the ones that can take a couple of siphons. So you actually reduce Lord Vader's damage when you have just Supreme Leader Kylo Ren if you spread out amongst the tanks here. So in most cases, you put the tank tech on Supreme Leader Kylo Ren, and you get 64 banners versus 61 banners. Takes less time, and there is a slightly less reliability here. Mostly, you cannot take Supreme Leader Kylo Ren against Lord Vader, or the duo of SLKR and Watt against Lord Vader, if there's a combination of Maul plus Vader, Maul plus Piet, or Maul plus Gideon. It actually works. All those cases work. Like, none of them are 100% failures, but it's more like 50 to 70 success rates, which is not really acceptable in GAC most of the time. But anyway, this is a great use of Supreme Leader Kylo Ren against a very, very good GL. But Lord Vader is actually fantastic on offense as well. So, look, surprise, surprise against SLKR. Now, you have to look at the team comps a bit more. Like, as you get against certain team comps, this doesn't work. But against, really the most popular one that most, talking about playstyles, most of the do what I do, right? The TW is like the most, I wouldn't say the most, but one of the most popular TW comps. You really have to have your Phasma mod set up correctly. Another popular one for like lower GP guilds is this one here with 2 tanks in it. But anyway, this one, 100% success rate with Lord Vader solo against Supreme Leader Kylo Ren. Just keep that in mind. This is averages. If your Lord Vader is relic relic level higher than Supreme Leader Kylo Ren, like you choose to relic 9 Lord Vader, for instance, you can basically auto the fight against a relic 8 SLKR. So there's other instances of this being effective, like you have Rey, a solo Rey versus Sith Eternal Emperor. I think it's possible for Rey to lose, but very, very complicated. There's only a few odd instances. Not many people put C on defense, so that's something to keep in mind as well. But when you do see it, Rey is an awesome option to one-on-one a GL for great points. C versus, you don't need Watt. Just throw in another Sith character. A tank is better. Versus pretty much any JML comp, and you'll be fine. You just have to link JML, he'll be taunting, and then whatever the DPS character is, JKL or Gas or Cam or whoever. And you'll get very high banners, almost no risk. It's a very popular one, or very useful one. And there's more of them than just this, but this is, if you take a few minutes to look through the counters, sort by max banners, it's easy to see these. Like, this is not a complicated process. Another thing that's a downside effect of the community aspect for GAC counters. People put strange choices on defense, so they waste characters effectively. So the most popular here is this DR, the Sith Empire team, and they throw in Darth Talon in there. Darth Talon's fantastic with Darth Traya primarily, but like Darth Maul, the Traya trio, and Darth Talon is also useful. Or using Darth Traya on offense, she's a fantastic offensive team now. She counters the Dash team. She counters Mon Mothma and Kyle Katarn. We talked about this last show. But anyway, check this out. This is the other one I want to talk about. Let's talk about this first. So here we have first a Darth Revan team without Darth Talon in it. Let's look at the counters, right? Gas is almost 100, Troopers 90%, different varieties. Mirror 90%, Troopers again. You add in Death Trooper instead of range. But you essentially see, in most situations, never use Gideon against, well, not never, but it's not usually a good choice to use Gideon against Against Sith Empire, unless you really, really have to. He gives them a debuff, and they cannot have their TM reduced by Stark, for instance, which is a better character. Anyway, but you see sort of the popular counters here. It doesn't change much if you have HK in there instead. Now let's look at what happens when you add in Darth Talon. What does it do to the counters, right? And first of all, there's 3,000 or so battles. So, Darth Talon, you have way more battles with Darth Talon in there. So you have 9,000. You have like 3 times as much, right? What does it change to the counters? Oh, gas, still very easy. Troopers, it drops like 5 to 10%-ish. But for good players, this is not really making a significant difference. Maybe this will change when more people have Darth Talon Relic, but by my experience, having Darth Talon Relic and fighting against many players with Darth Talon Relic, it doesn't change. But effectively, the troopers are around 90 versus, oh, actually, I was wrong. Trooper counter is actually easier in terms of percentage. With the addition of Zam Omicron in here, the Bounty Hunter team still works. The mirror isn't effectively changed. Like, the point I'm trying to make is the popular counters that are used don't get reduced. And you're giving up a very valuable character on offense, especially, although she could go on defense with Darth Traya. It makes Darth Traya counters to Darth Traya much more difficult. So this is one of the cases where people follow a trend without actually thinking about it themselves, and it doesn't help. They're hurting themselves effectively by reducing the amount of options they have. Another one is the Beskar Mando. Let's look at it. See, so again, this comes from TW mostly, I think. I think actually maybe some streamer made this one popular, but I think it's primarily a TW thing. Adding Dengar with Beskar Mando. So what do you end up with teams? Again, no GLs, keeping the percentile check. I'm just looking at Bam Dengar. So DR, Gas, EP Jade, fantastic counter. Bounty Hunters are down here as well. Everything like 90-ish%. Some of the Bounty Hunter ones not quite as well. Even Shack Troopers, pretty decent chance, right? So what happens if we go to the traditional with Bo-Katan and Nest? Or you could use another one besides Bo-Katan. This is just one of the more common ones to see. Basically same counters, same 90 to 100 success rates. Bounty Hunters seem actually easier. Well, they are easier versus Dengar because it's usually get Bo-Katan faster and she dispels as well as dazes. And EP Mara Jade is actually more difficult against Bo-Katan versus Dengar. So again, people are just choosing something, not actually looking at the data or thinking about it or chatting with their guildmates or something like that. So keep this in mind when you're copying somebody's defense. Spend 2 minutes, not even 2 minutes, 30 seconds per defense to figure out why. What's the advantage? And by the way, there's an easier way to do it than just going to GG. Go here to Grand Arena Science. Let's choose Darth Revan, right? So Darth Revan, and then we'll choose Talon. And you see this stuff here, but you can automatically just populate the GG report by using the Grand Arena Science tool. So it makes the searching part a little bit easier. Anyway, so back to these here. Let's talk about some offensive trends. So for defenses, just think about the defenses you're copying and why you're actually using them. Offensive trends. So this obviously is not going to kill GLs any longer with the patch from today, but still quite popular. You can see, for instance, that's GG we're talking about, so much more useful now. Maybe I didn't have the window open for this one. Anyway, so Qui-Gon Jinn and Jedi Anakin against many non-GL squads is fantastic. I have them open at the end. Yeah, here we go. So this doesn't change. Well, he will get less offense a little bit. So this may change. But keep in mind that this is you can also find better teams to do it against, or add a third character to make it 100%. This is a great way to get max banners against less powerful teams, obviously, and not against GLs, because that adds a whole level of RNG into it. Well, now not only RNG, it reduces the damage enormously. But keep in mind, this is a popular team and very useful. Not popular, but a very useful team that should become more popular. EP and Mara Jade, amazing. Can do a bunch of stuff. This is the Star Killer setup. That's Star Killer. Where's my data? Anyway, I lost my EP Mara Jade screens. They take an EP team against, I don't want to say everything, but these two characters with the correct supporting cast, Empire or Sith, allow you to kill a huge amount of characters. This is one of the things we'll talk about here in a moment. It's the speed meta, but less mod focused and more character focused. Many of the new characters are extremely fast or have a unique or Omicron that gives them a large amount of speed regardless of their speed mods. So Mara Jade is not exactly that. She does grant some additional speed in some situations, but primarily she gives a huge amount of TM boost under EP with her abilities, her 2 AoE abilities, and her base speed is incredibly high. She's one of the top 5, I think, non-GL characters in the game. So you can make her very fast to make sure that she goes first. And once she goes first, then she grants TM to everybody. So this is a very important thing to keep in mind when you're thinking of your teams and your development. A lot of it is more based around the character teams rather than the mods you have on your team. For counters in particular, I'm talking about. So, another interesting offensive trend, General Grievous, you can see here. So Season 21, General Grievous was used 1,100 times. Season 23, General Grievous, 2.5 times as much, almost 3,000 times. And taking out a wide variety of team. Think, not banners, this is not banner effective. So this talks into what I was talking about earlier, how you have to, in this meta, you have to think about more the middle level of teams. There's a wider variety of these middle tier of teams that can take out more middle tier teams. And Grievous is one of those. He is sort of easily beat on defense, either Bad Batch for high banners, or Night Sisters for low banners, or the GG nuke team. You can use the Bastilla-led team for high banners and no RNG. But those are pretty specific teams. So you can like try and force a Night Sister counter, for instance, or a GL for a high banner. It's much more rock, paper, scissors now than it was in the past. But anyway, look at him now. Takes out the Darth Maul Revan team with Talon. Fantastic use. What a trade. An amazing trade of characters there. Very good trade against the JTR team, which is quite powerful. Good against CLS, that's been known for a while. So this whole who to attack tool on GG is amazing. Definitely think about using that more. Oh yeah, and Star Killer. We've got to see Star Killer here. So this is first of all on a defensive perspective. Star Killer is a shit defensive GL when your opponent has sort of the same roster as you do. When you have a much higher roster, then great, put him on defense, or you're putting a FU defense, absolutely. But you can see GG beats it easily, Bounty Hunters beats it easily. A lot of people don't have Star Killer now, I understand, but as you're climbing, you may face people with it, and in the next, probably with the farming, probably in Season 3 we'll see a lot more, or Season 20, sorry, the third of the new seasons. Now it's starting Season 24 in a week, and in Season 25 probably, and certainly in Season 26, a lot of people will have Star Killer. So this is just an example of what you can expect, or what the current data shows. He's easy to beat on defense. I wouldn't say easy, but there's a couple of teams who beat him very reliably. And cheap teams, GG and Bounty Hunters. Well, Bounty Hunters is very flexible now, but GG is a pretty cheap team to beat Star Killer. But on offense, damn, Starkiller is amazing. So yeah, gas, DR, whatever, simple team. But let's look at the GLs. Depends on the lineup, and we're sorting by scene here, by the way. And there's only 300 fights, so not that many. Can beat SLKR. 3 fights against just this rate comp, 100% win rate. That's amazing. You don't see in here there's fights against JML. He does very well against JML. Mostly it's EP and Mara Jade, but it's great against him. Take a look through the data here. There's other Starkiller comps too. This is not the only one. The old Ben 1 is a decent one. The nice thing about this comp with Mara Jade and EP is you can make Mara Jade very fast, and she gets 35 additional speed with Starkiller. So a non-GL is going to have an extraordinarily difficult time of going first. So it's good on defense, but it's great on offense too. There's the issue of cleanses. You'll see, maybe not now, but in a while, you'll start seeing General Kenobi as the tank, the Jedi tank, in most Starkiller teams. That's one of the risks Starkiller has, is a reactive tank. And the cleanse is helpful too. So I think you'll start seeing like fast-ish, tenacity-focused General Kenobis. And with Mara Jade, her basic will call EP to assist, and when EP assists, Starkiller will assist. Then EP also assists, or does a basic. That's mostly what he's going to be doing, because with the shock, you'll gain more TM, and go basic more often. Starkiller will assist. So I think this is probably one of the more effective ways to build Starkiller's ult, in addition to just straight out damage. But there's other teams. Again, Vader's a good one. Gives up, you're forced to use Vader in another place, and more turn order restrictive with the Vader comp. But there's lots of other things, like this will develop a lot more over time. Yeah, so that's Starkiller is amazing. Dash is another one. Incredibly good on defense, has some hard counters. Incredibly good on offense as well. So again, rock, paper, scissors. There's so many different things to consider. So it's going to be a 42-minute episode. I'm not going to cut any of this, by the way, so I hope you enjoy this longer than I anticipated show. So let's talk about the future. Some things are the same as before. So this first one is a combination of what we talked about last episode. The new marquees in Starkiller are incredibly impactful to the GAC meta, and something that I'm very excited about, and I think will continue to change. Hopefully we get more marquees like this, but these marquees are awesome. We've never had so many flexible characters all at once before. It's amazing. There's more and more Omicrons available. Iden Verso, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. Didn't play Battlefront 2. Has an Omicron for GAC. Looks like a pretty good one. Not amazing, but pretty good. These are going to become more and more, and it's going to change GAC hugely, and TW and TB, but we're focused on GAC here. There's some rumors of GAC Fleet History coming to GG soon. Just a rumor for now. I have no concrete information, and I have no sources or nothing like that. But that would be huge for just GAC in general and Fleet, like we talked about before. So 2 things that are tied together here, and the last 2 things I want to talk about in this very, very long show is choice paralysis. Well, that's what I'm calling it, choice paralysis. This is mostly at a higher roster level, like in Kyber 1, Kyber 2 even. There are very few situations where a team on defense does not have a counter available to that player on offense that has a 90-95% chance success rate. Most people don't check. Or there's 3 teams available, and this is where strategy is involved. They're not sure which one they want to save for the back wall. That's great. Like if your opponent can place a defense like that, awesome. or if you play such a strong defense that you only have one or two teams available for certain teams in the back wall, well, it's a very interesting strategic position to put yourself into, but usually it's not needed. So most people that I see fail, most streamers, okay? This is different than what I'm seeing in the data itself. Just if you play your GAC based on data and you don't have any like execution failures in the battle itself, then you should be able to win every single fight all the time. Very roster dependent, obviously. Much more complicated when you're a lower roster, 7 million roster in Kyber 2 or Kyber 1, or 7 million roster in Kyber 1, let's say. Then you have more complicated choices to make. But in general, keep in mind that most fights will have a counter available, or more than one counter available, if you just take the time to look. Which takes time, but the data is there, and these new marquees are fantastic. And the last thing here, many people make poor counter choices compared to battle execution mistakes. If you make a good counter choice, it will counteract the mistakes you can make inside the battle. Sometimes you don't have that choice, or you're saving something for the back wall, so you take a 90% counter instead of a 100% counter. That happens. That's part of the fun and awesome parts of GAC. But keep that in mind when you are choosing your counter, when you're considering what counter you want to choose. Choose one that gives you the maximum amount of flexibility to make a mistake. And consider, do you want to make a mistake in the front wall, which forces you to use two teams? Or do you want to like use a better team in the front wall and leave your potential for mistake in the back wall? It's a very interesting dynamic here, these last two choices, that streamer-wise, and streamers are not the best players, there's a lot of very good ones, but in general, there's a lot more streamers or people who share content that have videos that we can learn from together that make many mistakes. So for you, if you don't want to make those same mistakes, take time to think about what you're doing with your counters, which counters you're choosing. Are you choosing one that gives you the most flexibility for the battle execution mistakes? Or are you giving up and you're expecting to play perfectly in the battle and trying to have more of these available for the back wall? Nobody can answer that for you. It depends on your opponent and your playstyle and everything, but I think that is one of the things that will be most important as the meta develops, because there are so, except for the very tippy-top ends, the defense and offense, few teams that are amazing on both, there are so many options available in the middle that being able to make the correct choice is probably the most important thing, versus having great battle execution or having the one team that nobody can beat. Those are more and more a thing of the past now, or will become a thing of the past if the meta continues developing as it has now. Anyway, this is an incredibly long video, 50 minutes long. If you got this far, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear any feedback, comments, suggestions, idea, whatever. Yeah, good luck in preparation for the next GAC. I hope you learned something, and cheers.